The waiter had just set down my plate when I heard it. My son-in-law's voice, sharp and cold. "Can you get security to remove this beggar from our table?" Every fork in the room stopped midair. The manager glanced at me, then at him, and the guards started walking my way. I didn't say a word, but in that moment I knew exactly how this night would end, and it wouldn't be with me leaving in shame. Welcome back to Revenge with James, where betrayal meets backbone, and we don't raise our voices, we raise the stakes. If you're new here, this is where the people they counted out become the storm they never saw coming. Today's story starts with public humiliation, but ends with a quiet move that changes everything. Before that night in the restaurant, my life wasn't perfect, but it was steady. I lived in a quiet neighborhood where the street lamps hummed softly after dark, and the air in the mornings carried the smell of wet pavement and strong coffee. My days started early, long before the city woke up. A hot shower, a shave with the same safety razor I've used for years, 2 eggs in the pan, toast just a shade darker than golden, the kind of routine you don't think about until it's gone. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't hurting. I had my work, my small home, and a daughter I'd raised with the kind of discipline and loyalty my father gave me. Weekends were for tinkering in the garage, fixing up old tools, and calling her to see how she was doing. She didn't answer as much as she used to, but when she did, I listened. Always listened. The world I knew was built on quiet sacrifice, the kind most people never see. I'd worked long hours, given up vacations, skipped my own needs, just so my family could have more. I thought that counted for something. I thought the people closest to me knew the value of those years. But looking back, maybe I was the only one keeping score. On the night everything changed, I walked into that restaurant carrying not just a wrapped gift, but a lifetime of belief that family meant respect. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It slips in while you're still sitting in the sunshine. My daughter Claire had her mother's sharp eyes and my stubborn streak. I used to think that combination would keep her safe in the world. When she was little, she'd sit on my shoulders at the county fair, sticky cotton candy in one hand, pointing at the Ferris wheel with the other. She used to call me her hero. Somewhere along the way, that word stopped coming out of her mouth. Then there was Mark, my son-in-law. The first time I met him, he shook my hand like he was testing my grip, his smile neat and practiced, the kind you see on a man who cares more about how he looks than what he says. At our first holiday dinner, he joked about old-fashioned men who don't keep up with the times, while looking straight at me. I laughed it off. Maybe that was my mistake. My late wife, Emily, would have seen through him faster than I did. She had a way of reading people in the first 5 minutes. She believed in respect as a language, and if you couldn't speak it, she didn't have time for you. Claire loved her deeply, and when we lost Emily, I did my best to keep the house warm with the same kind of love. But love, I've learned, can't stop distance from growing. Mark's parents weren't much better. Polished, polite, but only when there was something to gain. At a family barbecue, his father once asked me if I ever thought about downsizing my life, since men my age don't need much space. His mother sipped her wine and smiled at my answer, but her eyes told me she was filing the moment away. Even my friends had warned me quietly that Mark had a reputation, a man who measured worth by the cut of your suit and the weight of your wallet. But Claire loved him, and I wanted to believe she saw something in him that I couldn't. Maybe I wanted to believe that because the alternative was harder to face. What mattered most to me wasn't money, or titles, or having my name on a brass plate somewhere. It was the weight of a handshake I could be proud of, the kind of respect you don't have to ask for because you've already earned it. My father taught me that. He was a factory man, hands rough from decades of work, voice steady no matter who he spoke to. He told me once, a man's worth isn't in his pocket, it's in the way people talk about him when he's not in the room. I built my life trying to live up to that. My wife Emily understood that kind of worth. She didn't care if I brought home a bonus or came home smelling like the workshop. She cared that I kept my word, that I stood up when it mattered, and that I never looked down on a man who was struggling. She made our house more than 4 walls. She made it a place where people felt safe. When she passed, keeping that kind of home for Claire became my only goal. I never had a son, so Claire's opinion became the measure I held myself against. Every milestone in her life, from her first solo bike ride to the day she walked across the stage for her degree, I stood in the crowd, not to be seen, but to be there. To her, I wanted to be more than just a father. I wanted to be the standard by which she judged the men who came into her life. That's why the respect between us mattered more than anything. Not her praise, not her approval, her respect. It was the thread tying the years together, the thing that kept me steady when the world changed around me. Losing that would be more than an insult. It would be like losing my name. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was little things you could excuse. Claire calling less often, texts that took days to answer. When we did talk, her words felt edited, as if there was more she wanted to say but decided against it at the last second. I'd ask about her work, her life with Mark, and she'd keep it light, too light, like a script she was sticking to. When I dropped by their house one Sunday with a batch of her mother's old recipes, Mark met me at the door. He thanked me, said they were too busy for visitors, and closed the door before I could step inside. Through the glass, I saw Claire in the kitchen, her back turned, not waving. That image stayed with me. There were whispers in the family too. Nothing direct, but just enough to make me notice. A cousin mentioned Mark's big plans for the family business. I didn't know we had a family business. A neighbor said they'd seen Claire out shopping with Mark, carrying bags from stores I'd never known her to afford. I didn't ask questions, because questions have a way of changing relationships forever. Even my bank account had its odd moments. A small withdrawal I didn't remember making, then another, marked as a family transfer. I assumed it was a mix-up, until I realized my name had been quietly added as a joint contributor to an account I'd never opened. It was in those moments I felt something shift under my feet. Nothing had been said, nothing had been proven, but I knew the ground I stood on was no longer solid. On nights when the house felt too quiet, I'd think back to when Claire was little, how she'd race to the front door when I came home from work. Her hair would be a tangled mess from playing outside, her shoes scuffed from climbing trees. She swore she wasn't climbing. I'd scoop her up, and she'd wrap her arms around my neck like she never wanted to let go. Those moments could make a long day at the factory feel like nothing. I remembered the winter she got sick, and I worked double shifts just to cover the hospital bills. I'd sleep in the waiting room, wake up, head to work, and come back with her favorite soup. When she was finally well enough to come home, she told her mother, "Dad's my hero." I never told her, but I kept that sentence like a medal in my pocket. Even when she was in college, she'd still call me for advice: how to negotiate rent, how to fix a squeaky door hinge, what to do when a professor treated her unfairly. We'd sit in my old pickup in the parking lot outside her apartment, talking until the windows fogged. Back then I thought no matter how far she went, she'd always know where home was. Remembering those years made the present feel foreign. There had been a time when I didn't need an invitation to see her, when my presence at her table was a given, not a question. Those memories weren't just warm, they were the foundation of who we were. And without realizing it, someone had started chipping away at them. It was a Saturday afternoon when I drove over to surprise Claire with a set of her mother's old china. Emily had kept it boxed for years, saving it for when Claire has a home of her own. I thought maybe, just maybe, bringing it by would remind her of the roots she came from. I pulled into their driveway, box balanced in my arms, and noticed the blinds were drawn, even though I could see lights moving inside. I rang the bell. No answer. I knocked, louder this time. That's when the door opened just enough for Mark to step out, closing it behind him. He glanced at the box and smiled, but not the kind of smile that welcomes you in. "Claire's busy," he said. His tone polite enough to make it sound reasonable, but firm enough to make it clear the conversation was over before it began. I asked if I could just leave the box for her. He shook his head and rested a hand on the door. "Better if you hold on to it. We don't have the space for old things." He said it with that same easy smile, as if he hadn't just slammed a door without slamming it. Through the narrow gap before he shut it completely, I caught a glimpse. Claire, at the kitchen counter, looking down at her phone, not once looking my way. I stood there for a long minute, the cold air settling around me, until the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place told me exactly where I stood. That was the first moment I felt the ground tilt. No shouting, no public scene, just a door, a smile, and the quiet knowledge that something between us had already changed. I sat in my truck, key still in the ignition, wondering how the hell we got here. The box of china sat on the passenger seat, the same seat where Claire used to ride shotgun, feet on the dash, singing along to songs she pretended not to like. Now it was just porcelain and cardboard, rattling softly every time the wind rocked the truck. I thought about the years I'd worked overtime to keep our family afloat, the nights I'd gone without so she wouldn't have to. I thought about Emily's voice telling me, family is the only thing that should never make you feel like an outsider. And yet, here I was, parked in my own daughter's driveway, feeling like I'd shown up uninvited to my own life. The street was quiet, just the hum of a distant lawnmower, and the faint smell of someone's barbecue drifting through the air. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like standing outside a party you used to be welcome at, hearing the laughter through the walls. I stayed there longer than I should have, one hand on the wheel, the other on that box, trying to figure out when the front door stopped being my door too. There were things I'd done over the years that I never talked about, not because I wanted credit, but because some debts are best paid quietly. When Claire and Mark were first married, they were drowning in credit card bills. I wrote a check big enough to clear it all, told them it was a wedding gift, and never mentioned it again. I didn't want them starting their life under a shadow. And there was the time Mark nearly lost his job after missing a major deadline. He came to me, said he was desperate, said it would ruin his reputation if word got out. I spent 3 weekends helping him finish the work, doing research, making calls, even putting in my own contacts to smooth things over with his boss. When it was done, he took the credit, smiled for the cameras at some corporate event, and shook my hand like I was just another guest. I let it go. Those weren't acts of charity to me. They were what family does. You cover each other's blind spots. You keep each other from falling too far. I thought those moments meant something, that they'd built a kind of trust you couldn't buy. Looking back, maybe they just taught him that I'd always step in quietly, and that I could be pushed out just as quietly. It was a Thursday evening when I found it, not in some dramatic scene, but in the quietest way possible. A letter had been slipped under my door, misdelivered from the mailbox. It was addressed to Claire, but the return address caught my eye, my attorney's office. I knew the handwriting. Emily's will had been updated years before she passed, and I'd kept that document safe, never imagining it would change again. My savings, the fruit of decades, placed under his control with a single line of legal language. I'd never signed anything to approve it. Against my better judgment, I read it. The words hit harder than a punch. My name was still there, but my share, the home I'd built with Emily, the investments I'd made, all reassigned, not to Claire directly, but to her and Mark jointly. Signature had been copied, printed with a precision that made my stomach turn. I called my attorney, and his voice told me everything before his words did. "They came to me months ago," he said quietly, "told me you'd agreed, that you weren't in a position to manage these things anymore. It wasn't just a financial change. It was a declaration that I wasn't capable, that I didn't matter, that my own family could decide when my time was over." I didn't yell. I didn't slam the phone. I sat at my kitchen table, hands folded, listening to the clock tick. Silent rage is colder than fire. It's the kind that doesn't burn out. It sharpens. That night I decided something. I would see them face to face, but it wouldn't be on their terms. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I didn't brew coffee. I didn't turn on the radio. I just sat at the table with a pen and a stack of paper, writing down everything I could remember. Dates, amounts, names. It wasn't a plan, not yet. It was just the truth, laid out in black ink, stripped of any emotion. Numbers don't lie. I called my attorney's office, not to rage, but to request copies, the originals of every document with my name on it. I visited the bank, signed in with the branch manager, and asked for statements going back 5 years. I didn't explain why. People make fewer mistakes when you don't tell them what you're building. Every move was deliberate, quiet. No slammed doors, no confrontations. I didn't call Claire. I didn't confront Mark. I knew enough to understand that a man who shows his anger too soon hands the other side the advantage. Silence was my weapon now, and I was sharpening it with every page I collected. By the end of the week, I had a folder so thick it barely fit in my briefcase. I locked it in my desk drawer and went about my days as if nothing had changed. I even answered Claire's calls with the same steady tone, listening to her small talk while the weight of what I knew sat heavy between us. She didn't realize it yet, but the moment that folder snapped shut was the moment the tide turned. I started with the things no one ever pays attention to, the background noise of a life. My name came off certain accounts, one by one. Insurance policies, utility bills, joint subscriptions. They were so used to me paying them, they didn't even notice when the due dates passed, and the late notices started to stack up. Next, I made a quiet visit to the county clerk's office. A transfer of ownership here, a reassignment of rights there. Paperwork that took 15 minutes to file, but would take them months to unravel. The house I'd lived in for decades, moved into a trust they couldn't touch. The small investments they didn't even know existed, liquidated and relocated. Every move legal, every step invisible, if you weren't looking for it. I began recording my calls, not to trap them with big confessions, but to capture the tone, the way Mark spoke when he thought he was in control, the way Claire avoided certain topics, the way they tried to manage me without ever saying the word. On the outside, I was the same man. I still picked up the phone when they called. I still nodded politely at the occasional family gathering. But underneath, things were shifting. They thought I was frozen out of their world. In truth, I was clearing my side of the board, piece by piece, until the only move left would be mine. Some nights, I'd wake up and wonder if I'd crossed a line I couldn't come back from. Maybe I should have walked away. Maybe I should have let them have it all and saved myself the trouble. I'd tell myself that revenge doesn't change the past, it just sharpens the present. But the truth is, there's a weight to moving in silence. It settles on your chest, makes you question if you're still the man you thought you were. Emily used to say, winning isn't always worth the cost if it takes too much out of you. I'd hear her voice in the quiet, asking me if this was about justice or if it was just about pride. I'd sit at my kitchen table with that thick folder in front of me, wondering if I'd become the kind of man who measures his worth in victories instead of peace. But then I'd remember the look in Mark's eyes at that front door, the way Claire turned her back in the kitchen, the way my own name had been scratched out of the life I'd built. And I'd know the answer. Peace wasn't theirs to take from me. And if taking it back made me into something harder, then maybe that's what I had to become. It happened 3 days before the dinner. I was sitting in the corner booth of a diner across town, the kind of place where no one bothers you if you keep your coffee cup full. My phone buzzed an incoming call from a mutual acquaintance, a man who'd worked with Mark once or twice. He didn't know I'd been recording my calls for weeks. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "Ran into your son-in-law at the club last night. He was buying rounds for everyone, bragging about the early inheritance, said you'd finally seen sense, and stepped aside. Called you a charity case." The words didn't sting the way he thought they would. They landed flat like the final note in a song you've heard too many times. Later that night, the recording app caught something better. A pocket dial from Claire's phone. Faint voices, glasses clinking, Mark laughing as he told someone, "By next year we'll have everything. He won't even know what hit him." That was the slip, the overplay. The moment he stopped being careful because he thought the game was already won. I didn't tell him I'd heard it. I didn't call Claire. I didn't change a thing. I just circled the date for the family dinner in my calendar, slid the folder of documents into my briefcase, and pressed my only suit. If they wanted to play in public, I'd be ready to meet them there. The restaurant was warm and polished, the kind of place where the lighting makes the silverware gleam. I arrived on time, gift in hand, and found them already seated. Mark at the head of the table, Claire to his right, his parents opposite. He didn't look surprised to see me. Maybe he thought he'd invited me here for one last performance, one final insult before closing the curtain. Halfway through the appetizers, he leaned back in his chair, called for the manager, and in a voice loud enough for every nearby table to hear, said, "Can you get security to remove this beggar from our table?" There was a ripple of whispers. The manager hesitated, glanced at me, then at him. Two security guards began walking over. I set the gift box gently on the table and unlatched my briefcase. Inside, the folder thick, organized, precise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at him first. I looked at Claire. "Inside this file," I said evenly, "are the bank statements, transfer records, and forged documents with my name. As of last week, every account you've been spending from is frozen. The house you think you own, not in your name. The investments, liquidated. The business contracts, terminated." Mark's smile faltered, but I kept my tone steady. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to hand you this, a legal notice requiring you to vacate any property you've used under my name, within 30 days. And for you, Mark, a lifetime ban from this restaurant. The owner sends his regards." I slid the folder across the table. No shouting, no threats, just paper, ink, and the weight of a man who'd been underestimated for too long. The manager stepped forward, not to remove me, but to politely escort Mark and his family out. By the time they stood, the room was silent. Justice didn't fall like thunder. It fell like rain, steady, cold, and impossible to stop. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint clink of a fork hitting a plate 2 tables away. Mark's parents stared at me like they'd just seen a man they didn't recognize, and maybe they hadn't. Not really. Claire's face went pale, her eyes locked on the folder as if she could will it shut. Mark's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He couldn't. The paper said everything. The manager's voice was calm as he asked them to leave. Mark muttered something under his breath, but the room had already turned on him. Guests whispered, heads tilted, watching him like a man caught stealing in plain sight. He didn't make a scene. He just stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out. But his eyes found mine before he reached the door. No anger, no defiance, just the hollow recognition of a man who realized the ground beneath him had given way. Claire followed, glancing back only once, as if she wanted to say something, but she didn't. The silence between us was heavier than any words could have been. When the door shut behind them, I stayed at the table, unwrapping my dinner as if nothing had happened. The gift box sat beside me, unopened. Justice doesn't always end with applause or shouting. Sometimes it ends with the look in their eyes when they understand. Not only did they lose, but there's no getting any of it back. I'm not the same man who walked into that restaurant. Back then, I still believed that respect was something you earned once and kept forever. I thought loyalty was a wall no one could climb over if you built it high enough. I don't believe that anymore. I'm harder now. Not bitter but sharper. I don't give the benefit of the doubt so freely. I don't leave doors unlocked for people who've already shown they'll walk in and take what isn't theirs. The man I was would have tried to fix things, to bridge the gap, to find a way back. The man I am knows that some bridges are meant to burn, and you don't stand too close when they go up. There's a certain peace in that. Not the soft, comforting kind I had when Emily was alive, but the kind that comes from knowing your boundaries and keeping them like a fortress. I still work, still see the same friends, still walk the same streets, but I carry myself differently now. People can feel it before I even speak. Maybe there's a little loneliness in it too. You can't close the door on family without feeling the draft it leaves behind. But I'd rather live with that chill than open myself to another winter like the one they tried to put me through. In the end, I didn't just take back what was mine. I took back who I am. And that's something they'll never touch again. All through this there was one thing I kept. My old house key. The one Emily and I had shared. brass worn smooth from years in my pocket. I'd never replaced it, even when I changed the locks. It wasn't just metal. It was the weight of every meal cooked in that kitchen, every night spent under that roof, every fight and reconciliation that made a life. The night after the dinner, I took that key out of my pocket and set it on the table beside the unopened gift box. It was a reminder of what I'd built and of the doors I'd closed for good. That key used to mean welcome. Now it meant boundaries. I could still feel the indentations from decades of turning it in the lock, but I knew it would never turn for them again. I didn't throw it away. I didn't need to. It stayed right there on my desk, next to the folder that had ended it all. Whenever I caught sight of it, I felt the same quiet certainty I felt walking out of that restaurant. The knowledge that some things are yours, not because you hold them, but because you refuse to let the wrong hands touch them again. They'll never see that key. They'll never hold it, but they'll feel its absence every time they try a door and find it locked. And I'll keep it, not as a relic, but as proof of what I built, of what I defended, and of the man I chose to be when it mattered most. I thought that dinner would be the last chapter. I thought the papers on the table and the look in their eyes would be enough to close the book. For a while it was. Weeks passed. My phone stayed quiet. The air in the house felt lighter. Then, one morning, I stepped onto the porch to find an envelope tucked under my doormat. No stamp, no return address, just my name in handwriting. I recognized Claire's. Inside was a single photograph of the old house, taken from the street at night. No note, no explanation, just the image. I set it down beside the key on my desk. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was her way of saying she missed home. Or maybe it was something else, a reminder that stories like ours don't end clean. Sometimes they just pause, waiting for the next move. I left the photograph where it was, under the weight of the key, and went about my day. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help thinking, maybe this wasn't over. Was I wrong to protect what was mine? To pull it back from the hands that would have stripped it bare? Some people will say yes, that I should have let it go, that blood is thicker than pride, that forgiveness means more than any property or account. But those people weren't the ones standing in my shoes that night, watching their life's work paraded around like it belonged to someone else. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not asking for your blessing. I'm asking you to think about where your line is, the point where you stop letting people take and start taking back. Maybe you've already crossed it. Maybe you never will. But I can tell you this. Once you see the truth of what someone will do to you, you can't unsee it. And pretending otherwise, that's the kind of lie that rots a man from the inside out. So was I wrong? Or was I just finished being quiet? You tell me. They thought I'd do nothing, that I'd fade out of my own life quietly, leaving them to pick the bones clean. What they didn't see was that I wasn't gone. I was waiting for the right moment, the right move, the right place to put my hand on the lever. And when I did, I didn't have to push hard. I tell it the only way I can, from the seat I was in, from the eyes that saw it, from the hands that carried the weight. I don't know what they said when I left the room, or what stories they told to soften their part in it. I don't know, and I don't care. All I know is the sound of my own footsteps crossing that polished floor, the feel of the folder's edge against my palm, the way the air shifted when they realized the night wasn't going the way they'd planned. I carry the whole thing in my own memory, and that's enough. Their faces, their silence, the way their eyes avoided mine but couldn't escape what was in front of them. I didn't need anyone to tell me what that meant. I'd lived long enough to know the shape of defeat when I saw it. I'd lived long enough to recognize my own victory, even if it didn't feel like triumph. This isn't their story. It isn't even about them anymore. It's about the man who walked into that restaurant and the one who walked out. And they weren't the same man. 5 months later, I drove past the old house. The windows were dark, the lawn overgrown. A realtor's sign staked into the dirt. They'd been gone for weeks by then. I didn't stop. I didn't need to see inside to know the place felt different now. A house changes when the wrong hands touch it. It forgets you. It forgets itself. 2 years earlier, I'd been sitting in that same driveway with a box of Emily's china in the passenger seat, waiting for a door to open that never did. Back then, I thought I was losing something that could still be saved. Standing here now, engine idling, I knew better. Some things aren't lost. They're taken. And once you take them back, you never hand them over again. Would you have fought back? Or would you have just walked away and let them take what they thought was theirs? What would you do if the people you fed with your own hands turned and starved you? If the faces you loved most sat at a table and called you a beggar, would you lower your eyes and swallow the insult? Or would you wait and serve them something colder than silence? I know what I chose, but the real question is, what would you choose?